Are you more often sad than happy in your marriage? Are you tired of the conflict, stress, and the heartache? Have you exhausted the catchphrase, marriage is supposed to make you holy, not happy? Do you want to get off the rewarded cycle because you've discovered that after spinning your wheels for years inside of that cliche, you feel more unloved and lonely than ever? Have you emotionally flatlined and you're ready to give up, in spite of counseling and having read all the books on being the most excellent wife that you can be? After all these years, you understand what marriage is supposed to look like, yet there's just more isolation and disconnection. If that sounds like your marriage, you've come to the right spot. Hi there, my name is Lillian, and here I talk about God and the femininity that He created you with, and how that femininity can heal you, give you back your life, and possibly the marriage you've always hoped for. There's a caveat though. As you grow and your femininity shines brighter and you get stronger in the Lord, a true believing brother will love who you're becoming. But a wolf in sheep's clothing will hate your new sense of self. As God regenerates your heart to be the daughter that He always meant for you to be, the wolf will make your marriage worse. Thinking like a man destroys your femininity, but it doesn't happen all at once. It's more like a slow-acting poison that doses your heart bit by bit, so that inner girl, she shuts down very inconspicuously. The main way this happens in marriage is when you strive to do the role of a wife better. You think that this is the way to have a better one-flesh relationship with your husband, and that you'll get more of his love, or he'll love you better. And maybe you don't feel loved or any connection at all, and that leaning harder into your performance as an excellent wife will help him to love you better. You can tell how deeply you're embedded into this kind of masculine mentality by how hard you're striving to be that excellent wife from Proverbs 31, thinking that it's going to improve your relationship with your husband or make things better or create less conflict. That level of effort is an equal ratio to the level that you operate out of your masculine mindset. This reveals itself in conflict with your husband and through lack of authentic connection and attachment. It's a living proof that you can examine quietly and privately within your own heart between you and God. Women operate in their testosterone when they're unhealed. No one showed you that you needed to heal, and how the masculine and feminine polarities were created to interplay with each other in a relationship. So really what you're trying to do, like what I tried to do, was to enter that sexy, fun relationship dynamic between a masculine and a feminine creature. You're trying to enter that as a man. When you're striving to accomplish in your role as a wife, you can only do that from testosterone, and that means you're activating your masculine energy. You can't bring your femininity into that dynamic because you've been suppressing her and hiding her for so many years. You don't really even know your inner girl anymore. And it doesn't work in your marriage because it's not the right solution. Your husband didn't marry a guy, he married a female. And when you're constantly striving in a masculine mindset, he feels that energy from you. You look like a woman, but you don't feel like an estrogen embodied creature. Energetically speaking, you seem like a man. You can't make a marriage better or solve a problem by functioning in the duties done in the role of the wife. When the problem is in the friendship part of the marriage, that's the area where the solution is going to be found, not in functioning better. One is about receiving connection and attachment as you embody all your femininity found in your estrogen, and the other is about duty, obligation, and defined outcomes. That's all accomplishment that's done through your testosterone. That would be like trying to be a Christian by going to church every Sunday and doing lots and lots of religious activity for God, but never actually being alone and being your authentic self so that you can receive Him and His Word. You're not actually in relationship with Him. You're just doing lots of activity so it looks like you are. There's a disconnection that happens. We know it's not true that if you buy a book about forgiveness and read it, that outcome of doing the reading of the book is going to automatically make you a forgiving person. We know that's not a reality, because in order for forgiveness to happen, it has to be embodied in authentic connection and attachment to another person, not in a vacuum covered by activities. But somewhere deep down inside, we kind of think that. And that same divided thinking happens in marriage too. The main reason for that disconnection is that we haven't been taught that there's two fundamentally different parts that make up a marriage. A woman doesn't stop being a feminine creature because she gets married and assumes the responsibility of the role called wife. Christianity has failed to make the distinction between the partnership of the two roles that are called husband and wife, the visible parts, the public declaration where all the promises are made in the open in front of witnesses, and the private one flesh relationship between a man and a woman, where all those promises get to be authenticated behind closed doors, just between the two of them. The partnership of the roles is where the division of labor happens. It's based in outcomes and accomplishments. The partnership is driven by testosterone that you both have. Whenever you're accomplishing, you are doing this in the masculine mindset. The partnership between the offices of a husband and wife are defined and tangible. There's no life in them because the roles are defined the same for everyone. How we each do the provisional roles might be different, but the purpose and structure never change. God has given all of us the same parameters and vows. Think of the roles as a set of defined boundaries that surround and protect the one flesh relationship. That boundary itself cannot be a relationship any more than the hose can be the water contained inside of it. So when it comes to the one flesh relationship, it's got nothing to do with the function and everything to do with how connection and attachment of feelings and emotions are experienced with each other inside that protective covering. A one flesh relationship is the polarity of the masculine and the feminine and how they interrelate and connect with each other. It's the part of the marriage that's alive and growing. Without making this essential distinction between the role and the relationship, what happens to a woman when she gets married is that she's slowly conditioned to assume all of the responsibility for the marriage instead of the responsibility for her own feminine embodiment within the marriage. Over the years, she's conditioned to neglect her feelings and emotions that signal her feminine responses, those very things that make her a feminine creature. And basically, as she ignores those feminine signals more and more and leans into masculine signals more and more, she's turned into a guy. On the outside, she's got a woman's body, but internally, she's not really feminine because she hasn't cultivated that inside her heart, soul, and mind as a daughter of God. Instead, she's doing activities and responsibilities of the marriage, so she's been cultivating as a masculine son of God. How do you know if you're doing that? Here's 4 questions you can ask yourself. And how many times you answer yes is how deeply you've been conditioned to think like the man in your marriage. Am I the primary marriage builder? It's usually you organizing, planning, and initiating ways to make the marriage better. That can either be done in the open between the two of you, or you're secretly strategizing to make those things happen. The evidence that you're being reframed into a masculine creature is that it's you who discovers the solution for any marriage problems, or even anytime something just needs doing or something needs to change in your marriage. It's all you doing the striving and the searching and the planning. It's you that's the source who's doing all the initiating with all the possible solutions. The polarities between you and your man are switched. He doesn't do the work, and instead, he's the passive receiver of all your work. You're exhausting your little puny 10% of testosterone while he's wasting his massive 90%. A husband who wants you to be the head in the marriage is doing exactly what Adam did to Eve. He's passively leaning back and letting her do the work and merely receiving instead of stepping into his responsibility of providing his masculinity as the source for her femininity. A masculine male will provide whatever it is that's needed in the relationship and the marriage. In this case, it was protection. The husband was supposed to provide protection to his wife. He knew what he was supposed to do. God said that Adam knew what he was supposed to do. 1 Timothy 2:14. But it was Eve that did not know. The solution is to drop the reins of headship. And this is the part that will be hard to hear, but you've got to repent of that. God never intended for his daughter to be the head of the body in the one flesh relationship. He gave you a body full of estrogen, not testosterone. It's your feelings and emotions that you need to heal, learn about, and take responsibility for, not the man's part. If you want to learn more about dropping the reins of responsibility, there will be a link in the description box for 2 videos that I've done that can show you how to do that. I know it seems unfair to have to repent for being brainwashed into thinking like a man, but we sin all the time without knowing it. That's what David prayed in Psalm 139. He prayed for God to search his mind and heart. He knew there were things he was doing wrong, but couldn't see. Question 2. Do I identify exclusively as an excellent wife? You've lost your individual feminine contribution to the one flesh relationship. Your identity as a special individual daughter of God is more like an echo of someone you used to be. All the responsibility for the success of the marriage has been subtly shifted to the wife's role. So that means all the solutions to any of the changes or problems in the marriage are found in your ability to do your role and how skilled you are in submission and respect as a dutiful wife. If you find yourself always cycling back and landing in that same solution that demands that you strive even more to do that role of the excellent wife, you're basically forging the marriage on your own. That's a problem. Well, there's actually a few problems with that. First, all the doing and the striving to do that role more excellently, that comes from testosterone, not your estrogen. And testosterone is the smallest bit God gave you. The largest portion for us women is estrogen. God gave us so much estrogen so that we can receive the large quantity of a man's testosterone for the one flesh relationship. Our little bit of testosterone wasn't for the purpose of doing the initiation and the work of providing in the marriage. Secondly, when you're conditioned to do wiffery more excellently, you're being encouraged to step into God's territory 1 Corinthians 3, verses 6 through 7, it's him that makes the marriage grow or fail, not the woman. If you're being obligated to live out of your little bit of testosterone by striving to do respect and submission better, you're completely neglecting your largest capacity from your Father. He gave you your femininity specifically for the one flesh relationship with one of his sons. And this not only makes the marriage complicated and highly conflicted, but it conditions you personally to be in disobedience to the Lord, and it kills the polarity between the brother and sister friendship in the Lord. Your solution is to stop doing your husband's job for him and stop listening to Christian teaching that conditions you to live in the opposite way of who God created you to be. You've got to remove yourself from the hunter mode of fixing what's wrong with your husband and your marriage. Number 3, do I feel tired? If you're the problem finder and solver, you are tired because it's you who's carrying that invisible burden to discover how all the solutions in marriage begin and end with how you function in your role as the wife. Christian women stay in the masculine mindset because that's the way the world operates. And the world has been invited into the church and has saturated it, so much so that you can't tell the difference between the two. When you overfunction in doing religious activity, and we all know that the evangelical church is extracting from women at breakneck speed because there's so many of us there. When you overfunction in religious activity, it will naturally lend to overfunctioning in the wrong area of your marriage as well. If you're taking all the advice, counsel, and cues from Christianity, that connects the two spheres. You're striving in the world all week, then you're striving in church functions and activities, and all that striving makes it impossible for you to get out of that driving masculine energy, so it leaks into your marriage. Femininity can heal a marriage, but you don't do it, and it's not from the position of the head. It's God who heals your femininity for the benefits of his kingdom. And healing is hard, slow, painful work, yet that's what needs to happen for you. That's where your focus needs to be if you want to embody the femininity that God created inside of you. In Matthew 11:28, Jesus tells us that he can lighten that hard work, but it has to be him. He tells us to turn to him when we're tired, to take his yoke and let him show us what we need from him. The solution is to transfer back to God what belongs to him, and that's your heart, mind, and soul. Stop taking responsibility for doing things yourself. It might sound counterintuitive, but you need to lean back away from the marriage and your husband and lean into God as his daughter. I've got videos about how to lean back away from your husband, especially in conflict, and lean into God. I'll put links for those in the description box. Question 4. Do I feel tired and frustrated? You've been seeking so many solutions and taking the lion's share of the marriage research and solutions because you're anxious to have a healthy marriage. As you start to heal and slowly become your authentic self, you'll start to experience positive things happening in your relationship. But you need to be aware of a temptation. Beware of the temptation to shortcut the process and start doing works of femininity instead of continuing with your healing work with God. If your marriage has been conflicted for a long time, there'll be this huge temptation to switch back into masculine mode and to resume your old actions of trying to fix it again. Your motives will be right. You've experienced a little taste of how it's supposed to be and how you want it to be. If you're married to a healthy man, he will respond pretty quick, but not if you're married to a dangerous man, though. A healthy masculine man craves a feminine woman. That's how God designed testosterone to work. But if you start to do femininity or do feminine acts, instead of continuing on track with you and God, that means you're slipping back into doing something to get something. And that's a masculine trait, right? Men do good, then feel good. Even if the outcome you want, which is a better marriage, and obviously that's a good thing, right? But it won't be a good thing anymore if it's not done through God's mechanisms. If you don't catch yourself, you'll end up taking matters into your own hands because it seems right. And then before you know it, you will have landed on Proverbs 14:12. There's a way that seems right to a woman, but its end is the way of death. So, after you start to experience some real connection and attachment in your marriage, that authentic interdependence in the one flesh relationship that you've been wanting, there's going to be that temptation to not only want more, but to want it more quickly than what is God's timing. So your motives will be right. I mean, who doesn't want more good in their marriage? But by striving and doing more to make that happen, that will drive everything off the rails if you switch back into masculine mindset. It won't be authentic, so it won't last. Being a feminine creature is a journey of self-discovery, healing, and recovery. It's not a checklist of tips, tricks, and strategies to get your way or something you want. I know there's this whole movement that says act feminine to get a man or to get what you want instead of doing the healing work of becoming your authentic feminine self to please God. You can look the part by talking the talk or by dressing to what you believe is feminine or modest. You can act the part by walking the part with feminine mannerisms, but that's all it will end up being, is a part you're playing. So, because you can act feminine to get a desired result from a man, you have to be careful because manipulation is a very different skill than a shrewd feminine aptitude born from a real, authentically healed daughter of the king. Acting feminine is the deception of a brother, and your sin will be tracking with you. Numbers 32 verses 20 through 24. You know the saying, fake it until you make it? Well, it doesn't work inside of relationships. It might work in the world, but it doesn't apply to anything or anyone inside of God's kingdom. When we take back our real selves by healing, it's got to be done God's way, because it's warfare. You are taking back kingdom ground that was lost, and Satan doesn't like that. The difference between embodying femininity and acting feminine is like when people say they're Christians and they do religious works, but they're not actually born again. They claim to know Jesus Christ as their Savior, but He doesn't know them as the Lord of their life. I mentioned this in the introduction. They look like, sound like, act like Christians to fit into an institutional church paradigm, but they're not authentic. And in Matthew 7 verses 22 through 23, Jesus says you might be able to fake it with other people, but you can't fake it with Him. And that means if you try and learn feminine tips, tricks, and strategies to make your husband change to get your own way, even though you might think it's what's best for anybody, and you might even be right about that, that plan is going to backfire all over you because you cannot keep up the act of fake femininity. The real unhealed you will always break through. And it's going to be during stress and conflict, because that's always when the truth comes out. If you're married to a wolf in sheep's clothing, this mindset of deception plays right into his hand. A wolf in sheep's clothing is who I describe as a husband type number 3. I've put a link in the description box about the 3 different kinds of husbands if you're unsure about which one you're married to. So if you're married to a wolf, deception is his gig. So you're helping him in his strategy to abuse you. And not only but that pleases Satan, not God. And what's worse is that if you're married to a type 2 husband, that guy who's healthy and authentic, but he's either wounded or doesn't understand femininity, or both, you can do a lot of damage. And God will hold you accountable for the misuse of all that feminine power He put inside of you. Your solution is to completely shift your focus off your husband and realign your focus to be only on your own heart. Here's a different approach to taking the log out of your eye. You know, I say that there's a masculine way and a feminine way to read the scriptures. This is a feminine way when it comes to your marriage. You can completely diminish the focus on your husband's actions just by putting your heart and soul in the center focus. Unless you're invited to pray for him, unless he wants your help with something, and you'll know it, you won't have to guess, because men don't beat around the bush or hint. He'll be straight up about that. Make space in your schedule to be with God, not to pray about what activities to do, and not to pray about any of your husband's problems. If that keeps surfacing in your mind, you're going to have to really pray that Psalm of David's about your own heart and soul. You just want to be present with God. And the masculine way of being with God is definitely about activities and striving. But your way, our way, the way God created femininity is not like the masculine heart. Learning to embody your femininity will begin with learning to just sit with God in His presence and just wait on Him. Self-care is one of the primary components of the feminine embodiment. This is what God means in 1 Peter 3, verses 4 through 5. It's not the one to the exclusion of the other. There's an order to loving the Lord with all your heart, mind, and soul, and strength. The heart, mind, and soul come first, and this is why God addresses this section specifically to His daughters. You don't start with the outer self, with your hair and clothing and jewelry. Dressing down or dressing modestly is not what He's talking about. He means for us to get the priority right. Dressing modestly as a code or a religious rule will not heal your heart. It's the wrong priority. Estrogen operates from the inside experience of the heart, mind, and soul with God, and then it manifests on the outside through the strength on our body. When you allow yourself to be present with God in the moment, in real time, He'll speak to your heart. He'll show you where you need to heal. He'll show you where He wants to work inside you. I've done a video series about presence, grace, and discretion. I'll put it in the end cards for you. If you're living completely in your masculine mindset, always rushing in a fast-paced life that's full of striving and over-functioning to complete one goal after another, your feminine heart will stay hidden. In order to want to heal your femininity, you have to be able to see her. And that means you have to slow down to a stop and allow God to be in your space. He's not going to chase you around and force Himself on you. That's what a predator does to a woman. God's not that. He's your Father. It's your responsibility to stop and let Him into the space of your heart, mind, and soul so that He can heal those broken-hearted parts and He can recreate you into the feminine daughter He meant for you to be.